Hey everyone, it's Hannah. Today I'm going to be doing a video about 10 books that I really don't like. Some of these books I really do not like. I would even go so far as to say that I hate them for various reasons, and then there are some that just kind of disappointed me, so I thought they were going to be way better than they actually were, and so that's why I put them on this list. I have a few categories of books, so if you want to skip to certain parts of this video for the drama of it all or anything. First, I'm going to be talking about 3 classics. Then I'm going to be talking about 3 adult books, kind of. And then the last books that I'm going to be talking about are YA books. So I'll put the times at which I start talking about each separate thing in the description. So I don't actually own any of the books that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm just going to say the names of the books, and you can look up the covers if you want to, but I don't own these books because I don't like them, so there you go. First book I'm going to be talking about is The Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter is a classic. It is a book that I had to read for school, and I hated this book for many reasons. The writing was not good. The style was terrible. The story was basically just a very long slut-shaming story about why you shouldn't have sex with people if you're a woman, basically. Things that they did want you to take away from the book were very obvious. Like, it was like, this is the theme of the book. Second book I'm going to be talking about that it's technically a classic is A Clockwork Orange. And I read this when I was in high school. It wasn't required reading. It's a little too much for that, I think. And basically one of my biggest problems with most classics is that they are all books that are written usually by men, and a lot of them contain a lot of violence towards women or just generalized misogyny. This book, Clockwork Orange, was just full of extremely graphic imagery of these young men going out every night, raping and killing women and just doing terrible things. And when I read it at first, I wasn't crazy about it, and it was difficult to read because there were a lot of made-up words for some reason. So it wasn't a very easy book to read, not just because of the content, but also because of the way that it was written. The last classic that I really don't like, I also had to read for school, I read this my senior year in high school, is Madame Bovary. Madame Bovary is a book written by a man about a woman, and it talks a lot about the feminine experience, or at least tries to, and fails miserably several times. And I don't know if anyone else has really noticed this, but when I read classics that are written by men and are about women, usually the woman that the book is about ends up becoming overwhelmed by her life in some way and kills herself. This theme doesn't work for me. It's lazy writing, in my opinion. Besides that, the book was too wordy, and I don't believe that men, especially back then, have any idea what it's like to be a woman, and it's quite clear when they try to write from the perspective of a woman, and the things that they say are just so stupid, and so I really didn't like Madame Bovary for that reason. Next round of books that I'm going to be talking about are adult books. So, the first book or series of books that I'm going to be talking about is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. If you aren't familiar with what that is, these books are what the show A Game of Thrones is based off of. The first book in the series is called A Game of Thrones, and it is a fantasy series. It is like the only adult fantasy series that I've really read. Once again, these books rely heavily on themes of misogyny and violence towards women and just general abuse of all the female characters, which gets kind of old. I also think that in terms of fantasy, I like to be sort of taken away to a new and different world, and I didn't feel like George R.R. Martin's world building was particularly strong. I mean, it was different, but it relied heavily on fantasy tropes that you will see in basically any other fantasy novel, and there was nothing that really made it special. He also didn't dabble in anything where that made me want to support the book more. Like, he didn't have particularly strong storylines for people of color or gay people or trans people. Basically all that he had was incest and misogyny, and I'm not really interested in themes like that, so that's why I didn't enjoy that series. Next adult book that I will be talking about, and I guess series too, is 50 Shades of Grey. If you've been living under a rock for the past 10 years, you probably don't know what 50 Shades of Grey is about. But if you've been living in this world, you probably do know what it is about. And it's basically about this regular, like, timid woman who falls in love with this man who's super rich and like a CEO, and he's into very weird sex stuff. And that's the entire plot, basically, of these three books written about that. So just keep that in mind. Three long books that are basically just sex scenes. So I didn't like 50 Shades of Grey because, again, misogynistic themes, weird stuff going on. It was also very popular when it first came out as sort of escapism for the bored housewife. So I guess technically I wasn't the exact right audience for this book, but I still felt like it crossed several lines and I didn't enjoy reading it at all. The last adult book that I have that I did not really like is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. So this book is huge. It's really long, and it's about this boy where, I'm not gonna spoil it, but basically one bad thing happens in this boy's life when he's a pretty young kid, and then for the entire rest of his life, which we're following throughout this book, he makes very poor decisions and kind of uses that first thing as an excuse for every other thing that he ever does. I believe that fiction should be character-based, and so I want my fiction to be driven by what the characters do. And this book kind of did that, but by the end, I didn't feel like the main character changed at all. So that's kind of how I feel about The Goldfinch. I know that people really like Donna Tartt's other books. I think A Secret History, people really like that book. I haven't read that. But I might give it a shot. I think her writing style is good. I just didn't enjoy like this character. Okay, the last 4 books I have are all YA books. So please bear with me, book YouTube, because I know that I'm probably going to get some flack for these ones. First book that's a YA book that I really don't like and have actually read the entire thing is 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. So if you don't know, 13 Reasons Why is about a girl named Hannah Baker who kills herself. And in order to exact some sort of revenge or poetic justice because of the fact that she killed herself, she mails these tapes to people who she feels are responsible for her death. Now, just with that synopsis, we can sort of understand why this is problematic. I mean, she's killed herself and now she's blaming that on other people. And instead of making commentary on mental illness and about how what we should really be doing is reaching out when we're feeling this way, all Jay Asher really does is make his characters look bad by saying all these characters are responsible for the death of this girl. And I don't believe that that's how mental illness works. That's not okay in my book that she did that. I feel it's a very manipulative thing to do, and so the entire plot of that book, not okay with me at all. The next YA book that I did not like is The Virgin Suicides. This book is less popular, and I'm not actually 100% sure if it is YA, but I know that I read it when I was about 14. And if you don't know what The Virgin Suicides is about, it's about this family where there are 5 daughters in the family, and if you can tell based on the title, basically all of the daughters end up killing themselves. And the story is told from the perspective of these boys who lived across the street who are trying to figure out why this happened, like years and years later. And I also didn't like that. When I first read this book, I thought it was fine because I was 14 years old. But now that I look back on it, I think that it's a very bad book to market towards young adults. Like 13 Reasons Why, it talks about suicide in a way that I don't feel is productive. It sort of makes suicide out to be a solution and or just some kind of mystery that happens that we have to unpack and be like, why did these girls commit suicide? No one will ever know. It's not something that I condone, and I don't think that writing about suicide in such a flippant way. I think that's messed up and stupid, and so I didn't like that at all. Next YA book that I don't like is actually more of an author thing, I think, and so I'll just talk about that now. And that is Looking for Alaska by John Green. If you were a teenager anytime in the last 10 to 15 years, you've probably read this book and or heard of it. And so I'm not going to talk about the plot too much because I'm assuming that most people know what it is. But basically, when I first read this book, I didn't enjoy it even as a 14-year-old because the climax was in the middle of the book. And if you know anything about writing, you know that that's not how it's supposed to go. The climax is supposed to be near the end, and in this book, the climax is right in the middle, which I thought was very weird from a writer's point of view. I was like, how am I supposed to be caring about the rest of this book now when the biggest thing just happened like halfway through the book? So I didn't really like that when I read it. I did read a lot of his books as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, because that's what you do when you're a 15-year-old girl. And I loved The Fault in Our Stars. I will say that. Full disclaimer, I think that's a good book. I still believe that that is a good book. But I read Paper Towns, An Abundance of Catherines, and Looking for Alaska. I did not like any of these books because I felt that they all followed the same formula, which was nerdy, geeky guy somehow gets a girl who is mostly a mystery, and the ending is kind of sad. And to me, that is just lazy writing. He basically wrote the same book 3 times and made a bunch of money off of it and just changed everybody's names. And also it's unrealistic. Unrealistic standards for women, which is terrible to be growing up as a teen and to have these sort of standards placed on you. And also it gives men the idea that they are sort of entitled to women's bodies, in my opinion. That's kind of what I've gleaned from his books, is that no matter how boring or weird or annoying or like stalkerish you are as a boy, if you like a girl, you deserve to have her. I don't like that. The last book that is a YA book that I really didn't like, I am saving for last on purpose because I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about it, but now I'm going to. And I think that everyone's going to hate me for this, so I'm just going to say it. The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I know everyone loves Maggie Stiefvater, and I will be the first to admit I have not read all of her books. This book and the second book in the Raven Cycle series, I've read a couple pages. Like, I've read like 50 pages of the second book, but I read this book and that's it. I know she has other stuff. I'd be open and willing to read it. I just want to kind of say that I didn't like this book, and the reason why is partly because it didn't live up to the hype. So that's one of the books. This is one of the books where I didn't hate it for any like problematic reason like I did for the other ones. I mean, there's not a lot of like shitting on women or anything like that, so it's okay in my book, I guess. But the reason why I didn't like it was just because it was very tropey, first of all. So a lot of the characters were tropes. So you have Blue. She is basically the not like other girls trope, in my opinion. And then all of the boys are sort of tropes as well. My biggest problem with the Raven Boys is that nothing really happens. I have a friend who has read the entire series, and she told me the first book, when I read it, I didn't really like it, but I continued to read the next books in the series and I ended up loving it. Now, for me, if I'm reading a series and I don't like the first book, I stop reading. Because why would I waste my time on a series where I didn't like the first book? And I think that when Maggie Stiefvater was planning this series, she was planning it to be a series, and that it was very obvious to me when I read The Raven Boys that nothing really happened because it was basically the exposition of the story. Like, all that really happened in The Raven Boys was you got familiar with the characters and who they were. Nothing big really happened. I know that that's like one of people's like favorite books of all time, but I just really couldn't get into it and I didn't like it that much, so there you go. If you're still subscribed to my channel and you want to see me talk about books after I just trashed all these books, some of which you probably like, hit that like button, the subscribe button, leave me your angry comments if you want, anything, suggestions for another video. I don't know what I'm gonna do next, but that's it. Okay, bye!